London, 1818. Winter. The ballroom of Havisham Manor glittered like 1,000 fallen stars, chandeliers casting their golden light upon silk gowns and tailored coats. The orchestra played a waltz that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of high society, measured, elegant, and unforgiving. Here, in this gilded cage of propriety, reputations were forged and destroyed with equal enthusiasm. Clara Bowmont stood at the periphery of the dancing couples, her gloved hands folded carefully before her. She had learned, over the past 3 years, exactly where to position herself, close enough to appear engaged with the festivities, far enough to discourage conversation. Her gown, a modest creation of deep emerald silk, was beautiful in its restraint. She had chosen the color deliberately. It reminded her of the forest beyond her childhood home, a place where judgment did not exist, and where she had once believed in fairy tales. Those days were long behind her now. "Did you see her? The audacity of even appearing here," came a voice from behind a nearby fan. Clara did not turn. She had developed an immunity to the poison of whispers, though immunity did not mean the wounds did not still ache. "I heard the Marchioness invited her out of pity. How dreadfully awkward for everyone. They say she practically threw herself at Lord Whitmore. Can you imagine? A gentleman of his standing." Clara's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her reticule. Lord Whitmore. Even now, 3 years after the scandal that had destroyed her, his name could summon the ghost of humiliation. She had been 19, foolish, and desperately in love with a man who had seen her as nothing more than a pleasant diversion. When she had refused his dishonorable proposal, when she had demanded respect instead of becoming his mistress, he had retaliated with devastating efficiency. The rumors he spread had been surgical in their cruelty. He painted her as a scheming seductress who had pursued him relentlessly, who had compromised herself deliberately in hopes of forcing a proposal. Society, always hungry for scandal and already suspicious of a young woman without powerful family connections, had devoured the story whole. Her father, a country vicar of modest means, had been devastated. Her mother had taken to her bed for months. Clara's younger sister, Margaret, had been withdrawn from her first season before it even began. The damage had been comprehensive and irreversible, yet Clara had refused to disappear entirely. She had not fled to the countryside to live out her days in shame as everyone expected. Instead, she had remained in London, living with her aunt, a widow of limited means but unlimited compassion, and attended the few events where she was tolerated if not welcomed. She smiled when greeted, spoke when spoken to, and conducted herself with a dignity that somehow made her accusers more uncomfortable than any dramatic protestations of innocence could have managed. The clock struck 9, and Clara considered making her departure. She had fulfilled her social obligation by appearing. The Marchioness of Havishire, a distant cousin on her mother's side, had insisted Clara attend the winter ball, likely motivated by both kindness and a perverse curiosity about how society would react. Clara had accepted because refusing would have seemed like cowardice, and she had precious few things left besides her courage. She was mentally calculating her exit strategy when the orchestra fell silent mid-phrase. The abrupt cessation of music sent a ripple of confusion through the ballroom, dancers stumbling to a halt and turning toward the grand entrance. The Duke of Ashford had arrived. Even Clara, isolated as she was from the inner workings of society, knew of Sebastian Ashford. Everyone did. He was the Duke of Ashford, master of 4 great estates, possessor of a fortune that made other wealthy men look impoverished. But it was not his wealth that made the entire ballroom hold its breath. It was the man himself. He was 32 years old and had inherited his title at age 20 when his father died in a riding accident. Since then, he had transformed the Ashford holdings from prosperous to legendary, using a combination of shrewd business sense and absolute ruthlessness. He was known to be brilliant, demanding, and utterly uncompromising. He did not tolerate fools, did not engage in idle society games, and certainly did not attend frivolous balls unless absolutely necessary for political or business purposes. His presence here at a mere winter ball was extraordinary. Clara watched from her corner as he descended the stairs with measured precision. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with dark hair that fell rakishly across his forehead, despite obvious attempts to tame it. His face was all sharp angles and intensity, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they appeared black from a distance. He wore his evening clothes with the ease of someone who had never questioned his right to occupy any space he chose. Behind him came his companions. Lord Nathaniel Crane, his closest friend and notorious rake. Lady Catherine Ashford, the Duke's younger sister and one of the most formidable women in London, and several others of equally elevated rank. They moved through the parted crowd like royalty, which in essence they were. The Marchioness of Havishire rushed forward, her face flushed with the triumph of securing such prestigious guests. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honour! We had not dared to hope." "My apologies for the late arrival," Sebastian said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. It was a remarkable voice, deep, controlled, with an edge that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed. "Business detained me longer than anticipated." Of course. Please, you must allow me to introduce you to—" But the Duke was no longer listening to his hostess. His dark gaze had swept across the ballroom in a single comprehensive assessment, cataloguing and dismissing 100 faces in seconds. And then, inexplicably, impossibly, his eyes found Clara. She felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. For a moment that stretched impossibly long, they simply looked at each other across the crowded ballroom. Clara could not have said what she saw in his expression. It was too distant, too controlled. But something shifted in the air, some subtle change that made her heart begin to race. Then he was moving again, not toward the center of the room where the most important guests congregated, but in a direct line toward Clara's corner. The crowd parted reflexively before him, heads turning to follow his trajectory with growing confusion and curiosity. Clara felt panic flutter in her chest. There was no reason, absolutely no reason, for the Duke of Ashford to be walking toward her. They had never been introduced. She had no connections to his world. This had to be some terrible mistake. But he did not deviate from his course. He walked past dowagers who had been waiting years for his acknowledgement, past young ladies who had been primped and positioned in hopes of catching his eye, past the very Marchioness who was now following in his wake with an expression of bewildered concern. He stopped directly before Clara, so close that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close she could see they were not black, but rather the deepest brown, flecked with amber like embers in coal. There was intelligence in those eyes, and something else, something calculating and purposeful that sent a shiver down her spine. "Miss Bowmont," he said, and his use of her name sent a fresh wave of shock through the assembled crowd. He knew who she was. How? Clara managed a curtsy, her training overriding her confusion. "Your Grace." "I find myself weary of dancing with partners I cannot tolerate," he said, his voice pitched for her ears, but somehow carrying to the breathless spectators around them. "Would you do me the honor of a waltz?" The request was so absurd, so utterly impossible, that for a moment Clara thought she had misheard. The Duke of Ashford was asking her, Clara Bowmont, the scandal of London, to dance. It had to be some elaborate jest, some cruel new torture devised by society's elite. But his extended hand was steady, and his expression betrayed no hint of mockery. "Your Grace," Clara said carefully, acutely aware of every eye upon them. "I fear you may be misinformed about—" "I am never misinformed, Miss Beaumont," he interrupted, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I am, however, impatient. Will you dance with me or not?" Behind him, Lady Catherine Ashford stood with an expression of serene satisfaction that suggested this was no mistake. Lord Crane looked openly amused, and the rest of London's finest appeared on the verge of collective apoplexy. Clara looked at the Duke's outstretched hand. She thought of the 3 years of whispers, of small cruelties and grand humiliations. She thought of her father's disappointment and her sister's lost opportunities. She thought of Lord Whitmore and his lies, and of every person in this room who had believed those lies without question. And then she placed her hand in Sebastian Ashford's and let him lead her onto the dance floor. The orchestra, after a moment of stunned delay, resumed playing. Sebastian's hand settled at Clara's waist with proprietary confidence, and they began to move. He was an excellent dancer, of course he was, guiding her through the steps with effortless precision. "You are wondering why," he said quietly. speaking only to her despite the hundreds of eyes tracking their every movement. "I am wondering many things, Your Grace. I have a proposition for you, Miss Bowmont, one that I believe will serve both our interests admirably." Clara missed a step, but his hand tightened at her waist, keeping her steady. "I cannot imagine what interests we might share." "Can you not?" His dark eyes bore into hers. "You need vindication. I need a wife. The mathematics are quite straightforward." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "I beg your pardon? I will be plain, as I detest wasted words. I have decided it is time for me to marry. My sister has been nagging me about securing the succession, and I find her arguments persuasive. However, I have no interest in the simpering debutantes who have been paraded before me for the past decade. They bore me to distraction." "That is hardly my concern, Your Grace. Indeed not. But here is what should concern you. I am prepared to offer you my hand in marriage, along with all the power and protection that comes with the Ashford name. In return, you will provide me with heirs and manage my household with the intelligence I suspect you possess. More importantly, your acceptance will send a rather clear message to London society about exactly how much I value their opinions of whom I choose to marry." Clara's mind reeled. This was insane. Dukes did not propose to ruined women in the middle of ballrooms. "You know nothing about me." "I know everything about you, Miss Bowmont. I made it my business to know." His expression was matter-of-fact, as if conducting extensive investigations into relative strangers was perfectly normal behavior. "I know that Lord Whitmore is a liar and a scoundrel who destroyed your reputation because you wounded his pride. I know that you have conducted yourself with remarkable grace under circumstances that would have broken lesser souls. I know that you possess both intelligence and fortitude, qualities I value far more than an unblemished reputation or substantial dowry." "Why?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "Why would you do this?" For the first time, something like warmth flickered in Sebastian's eyes. "Because I have spent 32 years playing by society's rules when it suited me, and demolishing those same rules when they proved inconvenient. Because I am tired of pretense and prefer honesty, even when it is uncomfortable. And because I suspect, Miss Bowmont, that you and I are rather more alike than either of us might have anticipated." The waltz was ending, the final notes trailing away. The entire ballroom was frozen in anticipation of what would happen next. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness. This was impossible. This was the answer to every prayer she had been too proud to utter. Sebastian's hand tightened on hers. "I will not ask you again, Miss Bowmont. I am not a man who begs, but I am a man who keeps his promises, and I promise you this. If you accept my hand, I will spend every resource at my disposal, ensuring that those who wronged you understand the magnitude of their mistake. You will never again stand in corners at balls. You will never again endure whispered insults. You will be the Duchess of Ashford, and that title carries more power than all the gossip in London combined." Clara looked up at him, at this strange, intense man who had materialized in her life like something from a fever dream. She thought about saying no, about clinging to the last scraps of her pride and her independence. She thought about saying yes, and everything that acceptance would mean. Then, before the entire assembled aristocracy of London, before the whispers and the judgment and the years of accumulated hurt, Sebastian Ashford did something that no one, least of all Clara, had anticipated. He knelt before her. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The Duke of Ashford, possibly the most powerful man in England, was on one knee in the middle of the dance floor, looking up at the woman society had deemed beneath notice. "Miss Clara Bowmont," he said, his voice ringing clear and strong, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For 3 years, Clara had been invisible. For 3 years, she had been nothing more than a cautionary tale, a whispered warning about the dangers of reaching above one's station. For 3 years she had been strong, because she had no other choice. But in this moment, with this impossible man kneeling before her and offering her not just salvation but vengeance, not just protection but power, Clara Bowmont allowed herself to be something she had not been in a very long time. She allowed herself to hope. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Yes, Your Grace. I will marry you." Sebastian rose in one fluid motion, and without hesitation, without concern for propriety or audience, he pulled Clara into his arms and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a declaration, a statement of intent that reverberated through the ballroom like a thunderclap. When he finally released her, Clara was breathless, her cheeks flushed, and the entire room was in chaos. Lady Catherine Ashford began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clapping that was soon joined by Lord Crane and a handful of others brave or politically savvy enough to recognize which way the wind was blowing. The Marchioness looked as though she might faint. The gossips were already spinning their new narratives, reshaping their opinions with the speed of those who understood that power always dictates truth. And Clara, standing in the circle of Sebastian Ashford's arms, felt the weight of 3 years of shame begin to lift from her shoulders. The scandal had not ended. It had transformed. And in that transformation, Clara Bowmont discovered that redemption sometimes arrives in the most unexpected forms. On the arm of a duke who cared nothing for society's rules and everything for his own sense of justice. The morning after the ball, Clara woke in her aunt's modest townhouse convinced she had dreamed the entire extraordinary evening. But the heavy betrothal ring on her finger, a magnificent square-cut emerald surrounded by diamonds, proved otherwise. Sebastian had placed it there himself before departing Havisham Manor, his expression daring anyone to question his choice. Clara was studying the ring when her aunt, Mrs. Violet Hartwell, knocked and entered with a tea tray. Violet was her mother's younger sister, a widow of 50 with kind eyes and a practical nature that had kept Clara grounded through the worst of the scandal. "There are 17 carriages lined up outside our door," Violet announced, setting down the tray with a bemused expression. 17. We haven't had one visitor in 6 months, and now apparently we're the most popular address in London." Clara managed a weak laugh. "They're not here for me. They're here to assess whether the Duke has lost his mind." "Well, he certainly seems to have lost something." Violet poured tea with steady hands. "I've been awake since dawn trying to understand what happened last night. Clara, dear, I must ask, did you know the Duke before yesterday evening?" "I had never met him in my life." "Then why—" Violet stopped, shaking her head. "No, that's not the right question. The right question is, do you want this? Truly? Because I may be poor and we may be social pariahs, but you are not some commodity to be bartered. If this is merely a rescue, if you're accepting out of desperation—" "I don't know," Clara interrupted honestly. "Aunt Violet, I don't know what I want anymore. I spent 3 years wanting nothing more than to prove my innocence, to force society to see the truth, and now, suddenly, I have the power to do exactly that. But it comes attached to a man I don't know, to a life I can't even imagine." She looked down at the ring. "Is it wrong that I said yes anyway?" Violet was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across and squeezed Clara's hand. "It's not wrong to save yourself, darling. It's not wrong to accept help when it's offered. The question is whether you can live with the terms." Before Clara could respond, their elderly maid announced a visitor. "The Lady Catherine Ashford, ma'am." Clara and Violet exchanged startled glances. The Duke's sister had apparently wasted no time in calling. Clara hastily smoothed her morning dress and nodded for the maid to show her in. Lady Catherine swept into the small drawing room like a force of nature. She was 25 years old, tall and striking rather than conventionally pretty, with the same dark hair and intelligent eyes as her brother. She wore a travelling dress of deep blue velvet and carried herself with the unconscious arrogance of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Miss Bowmont," she said warmly, extending both hands, "I am delighted to finally meet you properly. And you must be Mrs. Hartwell. How lovely." Clara accepted the greeting with some bewilderment. "Lady Catherine, I confess I did not expect—" "Didn't you? I would have been here at dawn if Sebastian hadn't physically restrained me. He said something about allowing the poor woman to sleep before I descended upon her, which shows remarkable consideration for a man who usually has all the subtlety of a cavalry charge." She settled into a chair without waiting for invitation, making the modest furniture seem suddenly inadequate. "Now then, We have approximately 100 things to accomplish in the next 3 weeks before the wedding, so we'd best get started. 3 weeks, Clara's voice came out as a squeak. Sebastian wants to be married before the end of the month. Something about not giving society time to mobilize their objections, though honestly, who would dare object? The last person who questioned Sebastian's judgment found themselves ruined so thoroughly that they now live in Scotland raising sheep. Catherine's smile was bright and slightly terrifying. Anyway, we need to discuss your trousseau, the guest list, the ceremony itself, and most importantly, how we're going to ensure that every single person who cut you for the past 3 years understands exactly what a mistake they've made. Clara's head was spinning. Lady Catherine, just Catherine, please. We're going to be sisters after all. And before you ask the question that's written all over your face, let me be clear. This was not entirely my brother's idea. Well, the dramatic proposal was his idea. Sebastian does love a dramatic gesture, but I may have planted the initial seed. I'm afraid I don't understand. Catherine leaned forward, her expression turning serious. I've been aware of you for some time, Miss Bowmont. Your situation interested me, not out of prurient curiosity, but because I have made it my business to track the injustices society inflicts on women. Your case was particularly egregious. Lord Whitmore is a snake, and the fact that he destroyed you for refusing to become his mistress while he walks free is a travesty. How did you know that? Clara asked quietly. The true story, I mean. I never told anyone except my family. I have my sources, and more importantly, I have friends who know how to investigate discreetly. Once I learned the truth, I brought it to Sebastian's attention. He was displeased. He has very strong feelings about men who abuse their power to harm those with less. Catherine's smile was sharp. It also happened to coincide with his recent decision that he needs to marry. I may have suggested that a woman of intelligence and character who has been tested by adversity would make a far better duchess than any of the vapid debutantes being thrust at him. Clara felt something shift in her understanding. So this was a calculation, a convenient arrangement. Does that disappoint you? I don't know, Clara said honestly. I suppose I should be grateful for any motivation that results in my salvation. But you were hoping for romance. Catherine's expression softened. Miss Bowmont, Clara, let me tell you something about my brother. Sebastian does nothing without purpose. He is the most deliberate person I have ever known. But he is also loyal to a fault, protective of those he considers his, and possessed of a personal code of honor that would make knights of old seem flexible by comparison. When he decided to marry you, he did so with full knowledge of all the facts. And when Sebastian commits to something, he commits absolutely. That doesn't sound like romance. It sounds like a business contract. Perhaps. Catherine stood, smoothing her skirts. But I've observed that the most enduring unions are built not on passionate impulse, but on mutual respect and aligned interests. Love, if it comes, grows from that foundation. My parents' marriage was arranged, you know. They despised each other for the first year. Then, slowly, they built something real. By the time my father died, my mother was devastated. She never remarried. Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. Give Sebastian a chance. Give yourself a chance. I think you might be surprised by what you discover. After Catherine departed, Clara sat in silence, processing everything. Violet eventually spoke. She's rather formidable, isn't she? Terrifying, Clara agreed, and I think I might like her very much. The rest of the day proved Catherine's predictions accurate. Visitors came in a steady stream, their motivations transparent. Lady Ashworth, who had cut Clara directly at the opera 6 months ago, now gushed about having always known dear Clara possessed special qualities. Mrs. Pemberton, whose daughter had been particularly cruel in her mockery, hinted broadly about her own daughter's suitability as a lady-in-waiting for the future duchess. Clara received them all with polite coolness, her aunt by her side. She accepted no apologies because none were offered, only transparent attempts to curry favor with the Duke's chosen bride. It was nauseating and vindicating in equal measure. In the afternoon, Sebastian himself called. He arrived without fanfare, simply appearing in the drawing room like he had every right to be there. which Clara supposed he now did. "Your Grace," she said, rising. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" "I thought it customary for engaged couples to actually speak to one another." He glanced around the modest room, his expression unreadable. "I've come to discuss practicalities. I understand Catherine descended upon you this morning with her usual enthusiasm. I apologize if she was overwhelming." "Not at all. She was illuminating." Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "I'm certain she was. My sister has never met a secret she couldn't extract or a scheme she couldn't orchestrate. Please sit. I won't stay long, but there are matters we need to address." They sat, an oddly formal arrangement given that they were engaged to be married. Sebastian leaned back, entirely at ease in a way that Clara envied. "First, the wedding will be held at St. George's, Hanover Square, in 3 weeks. Catherine is handling most arrangements, but I wanted to confirm you have no objections to the timeline." "Would it matter if I did?" "Yes," he said simply. "This is not an abduction, Miss Bowmont. If you need more time, we can arrange it." Clara considered. More time meant more opportunities for doubt, for society to mobilize against them, for her to lose her nerve. 3 weeks is acceptable. "Good. Second, you'll need to move to Ashford House before the wedding. I know it's unconventional, but there are practical considerations. You'll need access to appropriate resources for your trousseau and preparations. My house has an entire wing that will be yours alone until we're married. Mrs. Hartwell is, of course, welcome to stay as well." "You've thought of everything." "I generally do." He paused. "Clara, may I call you Clara?" She nodded, thrown by the sudden informality. "Clara, I want to be clear about something. Last night was theatre, necessary and effective theatre, but theatre nonetheless. What happens between us in private can be different. We need not pretend to grand passion or make declarations we don't feel. I am offering you a partnership based on mutual benefit and I hope eventual respect. Is that something you can accept?" It was the honesty that undid her. After 3 years of lies and pretense, his straightforward pragmatism was oddly refreshing. "Yes," she said, "I can accept that. In fact, I prefer it. I have had quite enough of pretty words and false promises." "Whitmore," Sebastian said, his voice hardening. "Catherine told you she investigated him?" "She mentioned it." "What she didn't mention is what I intend to do with that information." Sebastian's expression could have carved stone. "Lord Whitmore will not attend our wedding. He will not be received at Ashford House or any of my properties, and I have made it known through appropriate channels that any family who wishes to maintain connections to the Ashford interests would be wise to follow suit. Within the month, he will find himself suddenly unwelcome at the very establishments where he destroyed you." Clara felt something fierce and hot coil in her chest. "You're exiling him." "I'm applying consequences. Actions have results, even delayed ones." He stood, preparing to leave. "I want you to understand something, Clara. When I say I protect what is mine, I mean it absolutely. You are about to become my Duchess. That means you have the full weight of my power behind you. Anyone who hurt you, anyone who mocked you, anyone who believed lies about you, they will all reckon with that reality very soon." He was at the door when Clara spoke. "Why me, Sebastian? Truly? There are hundreds of women who could give you heirs and manage your household. Why choose someone who comes with so much complication?" He turned back, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression slipped. What Clara saw beneath was unexpected, not calculation, but something rawer, something almost vulnerable. "Because I am tired," he said quietly, "of pretending to be something I'm not. Society expects me to be cold, ruthless, and utterly controlled. They're not wrong, but they're not entirely right either. You, Clara Bowmont, have spent 3 years refusing to pretend. You stood in corners at balls with your head high. You smiled at people who despised you. You didn't hide or break or become bitter. You remained yourself despite everything. That kind of strength is rare. That kind of authenticity is rarer still. I don't want a wife who will perform for society. I want a partner who is real, even when reality is uncomfortable. I want someone who knows exactly what I'm offering and chooses it with clear eyes." He paused. Is that honest enough for you?" Clara found she couldn't speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. She simply nodded. Sebastian nodded back, a sharp, definitive motion. "Good. I'll send a carriage tomorrow to move you to Ashford House. Catherine will undoubtedly have 17 new crises to manage by then." A hint of a smile. "Welcome to the family, Clara. I suspect we're going to make each other quite interesting." And then he was gone, leaving Clara staring at the closed door and trying to understand the strange, terrifying, exhilarating turn her life had taken. Ashford House was not a house. It was a statement rendered in marble and limestone, a sprawling Palladian mansion in Mayfair that seemed designed to remind visitors of their own insignificance. As Clara's carriage pulled through the gates the following morning, she counted 15 windows across the front facade alone, and suspected there were at least double that number around the back. "Good Lord," Violet breathed beside her. "Clara, this is terrifying," Clara finished. "It's absolutely terrifying." And yet, when the butler, an imposing man named Grimshaw who managed to convey both absolute dignity and subtle warmth, welcomed them at the entrance, Clara felt an unexpected sense of arrival. Perhaps it was the way Grimshaw bowed to her with genuine respect, or the way the staff lined up in the entrance hall seemed curious, rather than judgmental. Or perhaps it was simply that for the first time in 3 years, she was walking through doors that would not close against her. Catherine materialized within minutes of their arrival, a whirlwind of energy and planning. "Excellent, you're here. Sebastian's gone to the city for business, but he left instructions that you're to have complete access to everything. Come, I'll show you your rooms." She led them through a maze of corridors, each more opulent than the last. The house was a study in controlled extravagance, nothing gaudy, but everything of the highest quality. Finally, Catherine pushed open a set of double doors to reveal a suite that made Clara stop in her tracks. "This is the Duchess's wing," Catherine explained. "It's been unused since our mother died 8 years ago. Sebastian had it completely refurbished for you." The rooms were breathtaking. The main sitting room was decorated in soft greens and golds, with large windows overlooking an extensive garden. Through an archway was a bedroom with a 4-poster bed that could sleep 6 people, and beyond that, a dressing room that was larger than Clara's entire previous bedroom. "It's too much," Clara whispered. "It's exactly enough," Catherine corrected. "You're going to be the Duchess of Ashford. This is your domain. Get used to it." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of fittings, meetings, and increasingly surreal encounters with society's finest, all of whom were suddenly desperate to curry favor with the future Duchess. Clara attended teas where women who had snubbed her now competed for her attention. She received invitations to events that would have been unthinkable a month ago. And through it all, Catherine was her constant companion, teaching her the unspoken rules of her new position with a combination of humor and fierce loyalty. Sebastian himself was a more elusive presence. He appeared for dinner most evenings, and they fell into a pattern of surprisingly comfortable conversation. He told her about his various business interests, shipping, property, investments that she struggled to fully comprehend, but found fascinating nonetheless. She told him about her childhood in the country, about her father's parish and her mother's garden, about Margaret and the life she hoped her sister might still have. "Your sister," Sebastian said one evening over port. "She's 17 now." "Yes, she should be having her first season, but after what happened to me—" "She'll have her season this spring," Sebastian interrupted, "as the Duchess of Ashford's sister, sponsored by my family. Anyone who tries to punish her for your supposed sins will deal with me directly." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You would do that? Clara, in less than a week, your family becomes my family. That means something to me. It should mean something to you as well." He studied her with those dark, penetrating eyes. "You still don't quite believe this is real, do you?" "I wake up every morning expecting to discover it was all a dream. Dreams don't usually come with 17-room mansions and sisters who plan weddings with military precision." But his tone was gentle. "It's real, Clara, and you need to start believing it, because once we're married, you'll be one of the most powerful women in England. That power comes with responsibilities. I'm not sure I know how to wield power. Then you'll learn. I did. He leaned back, his expression distant. I was 20 when I inherited. My father died suddenly, and everyone expected me to fail. I was too young, too inexperienced, too educated beyond what was fashionable. They watched and waited for me to destroy the Ashford legacy through incompetence or youthful foolishness. Instead, I tripled our worth within 5 years and made enemies of half the peerage by refusing to play their games. He looked at her directly. You think society will easily accept you as my duchess. They won't. But that doesn't matter because we won't be asking for their acceptance, we'll be demanding their respect. There's a difference. And if they refuse to give it, then they'll learn what happens when they stand against an Ashford. His smile was sharp. Welcome to the castle, Clara. It's time to stop being the victim and start being the queen. The words stayed with Clara as the wedding day approached. She found herself standing straighter, speaking with more confidence, meeting the eyes of those who had once mocked her. And she saw something shift in how people treated her, not warmth, not yet, but certainly wariness. She was no longer just Clara Bowmont, the scandal. She was Clara Bowmont, soon to be the Duchess of Ashford, and that title carried weight, whether people liked it or not. The night before the wedding, Catherine hosted a small dinner with just family and close friends. Clara's parents and Margaret had arrived from the country that afternoon, her father bewildered by the grandeur, her mother in tears of relief and joy. Margaret, at 17, was wide-eyed with wonder at everything, and Clara felt a fierce protectiveness toward her sister that she hadn't anticipated. Lord Crane was there, charming everyone with practiced ease. He cornered Clara at one point, his expression unusually serious. "I've known Sebastian since we were boys at Eton," he said without preamble. "I've seen him in business negotiations that would make lesser men weep. I've watched him face down opponents in Parliament who thought they could intimidate him. I've never, in 15 years of friendship, seen him uncertain about anything." He paused, studying her. "Until you." Clara blinked. "I don't understand." "He's nervous, Miss Beaumont. He's been pacing his study like a caged lion, second-guessing every decision, asking Catherine and me a dozen times if he's done the right thing. Sebastian, the man who once bought an entire shipping company out of spite because someone suggested he couldn't." Crane smiled. "What I'm saying is this. Whatever this arrangement started as, it's become something more for him. I thought you should know that before you walk down the aisle tomorrow." Before Clara could respond, Sebastian himself appeared, his eyes immediately finding her across the room. For a moment their gazes held, and Clara felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude or pragmatism. "Tomorrow," Crane said softly, then slipped away, leaving Clara standing alone with her tumultuous thoughts. St. George's, Hanover Square, was filled to capacity. Clara hadn't expected such a crowd, but Catherine had explained that half of London would attend simply to witness what they saw as either a romantic fairy tale or a scandalous spectacle, and no one wanted to miss either option. Clara stood in the vestibule, her reflection in the mirror showing a stranger. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace, created by the finest modiste in London. Her dark hair was dressed with pearls and orange blossoms. She looked, she thought with some detachment, like she belonged in this world, like she had been born to wear silk and jewels instead of serviceable muslin and modest ribbons. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Margaret said, tears streaming down her young face. "Oh, Clara, I'm so happy for you." "Don't cry, darling. You'll make me cry too." Clara squeezed her sister's hands. "Are Mama and Papa seated?" "Yes, in the front row. Papa looks like he's attending a state execution rather than a wedding. He's so overwhelmed. Mama keeps dabbing her eyes." Margaret laughed. "The Duke sent them a carriage, Clara, with the Ashford crest on it. Papa nearly fainted." Before Clara could respond, Catherine swept in, resplendent in deep purple silk. "It's time. Are you ready?" Was she ready? To marry a man she barely knew? To become a duchess overnight? To face the entire society that had spurned her and claim her place among them with her head held high? "Yes," Clara said, and meant it. "I'm ready." The music began, and Clara walked down the aisle on her father's trembling arm. The church was a sea of faces, some curious, some envious, some genuinely happy. She saw Lord Whitmore near the back, his expression murderous. Sebastian's doing, no doubt, forcing his attendants to witness his own defeat, but Clara had eyes only for the man waiting at the altar. Sebastian stood tall and impossibly handsome in his formal attire, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. As she drew closer, she saw something in his expression that made her pulse race. Not just attraction, though that was certainly there, but something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. When her father placed her hand in Sebastian's, the Duke's fingers closed around hers with gentle firmness. "You're shaking," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "So are you," she replied, and saw surprise flicker across his face, followed by the ghost of a smile. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of words and promises. Clara heard herself making vows that would bind her life to this man's forever, and she did not hesitate. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian's kiss was different from the one at the ball, softer, more tentative, almost questioning. Clara found herself kissing him back with a fervour that surprised them both. The wedding breakfast at Ashford House was a glittering affair attended by 300 guests. Clara floated through it in a daze, accepting congratulations from people who would have spat on her a month ago, dancing with Sebastian while everyone watched, and gradually beginning to believe that this was, impossibly, her life now. It was during the fourth dance that she noticed Lady Charlotte Pemberton hovering nearby. Charlotte had been her closest friend before the scandal, but had abandoned Clara immediately when the rumours began. Now she looked desperate to speak. "To your Grace," Charlotte said tentatively when the dance ended, "might I have a word?" Clara glanced at Sebastian, who gave her a slight nod before stepping away. She followed Charlotte to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "I wanted to apologize," Charlotte began, her words tumbling out. "For my behavior these past 3 years. I was cruel and cowardly, and I have regretted it every day. I should have stood by you. I should have believed you. I'm so terribly sorry." Clara studied her former friend, seeing genuine remorse in her eyes. Part of her wanted to be magnanimous, to accept the apology and move forward. But another part, the part that had been forged in the fires of abandonment and betrayal, couldn't quite manage it. "Thank you for the apology, Lady Charlotte," Clara said coolly. "I accept it, though I'm afraid I cannot forget so easily. You abandoned me when I needed friends most. That's not something that can be repaired with pretty words." Charlotte's face crumpled. "I understand. I just wanted you to know—" "I know," Clara interrupted, not unkindly. "But knowing doesn't change what happened. Perhaps in time we might rebuild some form of friendship. But that time is not today." She walked away, feeling Sebastian's eyes on her from across the room. When she reached him, he took her hand. That looked difficult. It was necessary. Clara looked up at her new husband. "I'm learning that power means making hard choices." "Indeed it does." His expression was approving. "Come, it's time we escaped our own wedding." They slipped away from the breakfast under Catherine's knowing eye, taking a carriage to what Sebastian explained was his private estate just outside London. The house, more of a manor really, was set in rolling countryside far from the noise and judgment of society. "I thought we might want privacy for our first days as husband and wife," Sebastian said, as they entered the elegantly appointed residence. "No servants except a skeleton staff. No obligations. Just us." The word us hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had fully addressed. They were married now. This was their wedding night, and despite all the pragmatic conversations about arrangements and partnerships, they had carefully avoided discussing the more intimate aspects of marriage. Clara felt her pulse quicken as Sebastian led her to a drawing room where supper had been laid out. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence, both seemingly reluctant to address the elephant in the room. Finally, Sebastian set down his wineglass. "Clara, I need to be clear about something. I know what is traditionally expected on a wedding night, but I want you to understand that there is no obligation. We can take our time with the more intimate aspects of marriage. I won't force anything you're not ready for." The consideration in his voice nearly undid her. Clara had been steeling herself for demands, for expectations, for the loss of the last vestiges of her autonomy. This gentle patience was unexpected. "And if I said I don't want to wait?" she heard herself say, surprising them both. Sebastian's eyes darkened. "Then I would ask if you're certain. This doesn't have to happen tonight." "I know." Clara stood, moving closer to him. "But we're married now, Sebastian, and I find I'm tired of waiting. I've spent 3 years in a kind of limbo, neither fully ruined nor fully respectable. I don't want to spend my wedding night in another form of limbo. I want to be your wife. Truly." He rose to meet her, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. "You're certain?" "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm certain." Sebastian kissed her then, not with the performative passion of their public kisses, but with a slow, building intensity that made her knees weak. He pulled back long enough to say, "Then let me show you what it means to be cherished, Clara. Not claimed, not conquered, cherished." And in the privacy of their wedding night, away from society's eyes and expectations, Clara Bowmont discovered that marriage to Sebastian Ashford might contain something she had never dared hope for. Not just safety or vindication, but genuine connection. The first month of marriage passed in a haze of adjustment and revelation. Clara learned to navigate the complexities of managing a household with 17 servants, to host dinners for politicians and business associates, to walk into rooms and command respect through title alone. It was intoxicating and exhausting in equal measure. Sebastian proved to be an attentive husband in ways Clara hadn't anticipated. He included her in discussions about estate management, sought her opinion on business matters, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. Their nights were passionate, their days filled with the kind of partnership Clara had never imagined possible. But she also learned that being the Duchess of Ashford came with complications. The first real test came 6 weeks after the wedding, at a ball hosted by the Duchess of Marlborough. Clara and Sebastian attended together, and the moment they entered, Clara felt the familiar prickle of hostile attention. But this time, instead of relegating her to corners, people actively avoided her, not out of scorn, but out of uncertainty about how to approach the new Duchess. Lord Whitmore was there, looking haggard and angry. He had, as Sebastian promised, found himself increasingly isolated from society's inner circles. Clara watched him from across the ballroom and felt not triumph, but a strange emptiness. His destruction didn't undo what he'd done to her. It just meant they were both diminished by their shared history. She was pondering this when a young woman approached. Lady Amelia Thornton, barely 18 and clearly terrified. "Your Grace," Amelia said, dropping into a curtsy so deep she nearly toppled. "Forgive my boldness, but I needed to speak with you. I have nowhere else to turn." Clara's instincts immediately sharpened. "Please stand. What's troubling you?" The girl glanced around nervously. "It's Lord Ashworth. He's been pressing his attentions on me, making suggestions that are not honourable. I tried to refuse, but he says if I don't accept, he'll spread rumours about me like he did about—" She stopped, horrified. "Oh God, I didn't mean like he did about me," Clara finished gently. "It's all right. Tell me everything." The story that emerged was sickeningly familiar. Lord Ashworth, cousin to the man who had destroyed Clara, was using the same tactics on this vulnerable girl. Amelia had no powerful family to protect her, no connections to fight back. She would be ruined, just as Clara had been, except this time Clara had the power to prevent it. "Does anyone else know about this?" Clara asked. "No, Your Grace. I was afraid to tell anyone, but then I saw you tonight and I thought, perhaps—" "You thought correctly." Clara squeezed the girl's hand. "Stay here, I'll return shortly." She found Sebastian in conversation with Lord Crane and several other influential men. She touched his arm, and he immediately excused himself, his expression alert. "What's wrong?" Clara explained quickly, watching fury build in her husband's eyes. "We need to stop him, Sebastian. Tonight. Consider it done." He looked to Crane. "Nathaniel, I need you to gather Lords Pemberton, Hertford and Bexley. Quietly. We're having a conversation with Ashworth in the library in 5 minutes." Clara watched as Sebastian orchestrated the takedown with clinical precision. Within the hour, Lord Ashworth had been confronted by 5 of the most powerful men in England, presented with evidence of his predatory behavior, evidence that Sebastian's investigator somehow procured within minutes, and given a choice: retire to his country estate and never return to London, or face complete social and financial destruction. He chose retirement. Later, as their carriage rolled through the dark streets toward home, Clara studied her husband. "You had that evidence prepared. You were already investigating him." "I investigate everyone who operates the way Ashworth does." Sebastian's voice was matter-of-fact. "Men who prey on vulnerable women are a particular interest of mine. I've destroyed 7 such men since I inherited my title. Ashworth would have been the 8th regardless of tonight. Lady Amelia simply accelerated the timeline." 7? Men like Whitmore and Ashworth are a disease in society. They rely on silence and shame to protect them. I make it my business to remove that protection. He looked at her directly. "Does that disturb you? That your husband actively works to ruin people?" Clara considered the question seriously. A month ago, she might have been disturbed, but now, having tasted power and understood its applications, she found she was not. "No," she said slowly. "I think it makes you dangerous. But perhaps society needs more dangerous men who aim their weapons in the right direction." Sebastian smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually austere face. "Exactly. The powerful have a responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Most of them forget that. I choose to remember." "Then I'm glad I married you," Clara said, and meant it more than she had on their wedding day. But the incident with Lord Ashworth opened Clara's eyes to a larger truth. Power was not simply about social position or wealth. It was about choice, about agency, about the ability to act rather than simply react. And she wanted more of it. She began attending Sebastian's business meetings, initially just observing, but gradually she started contributing ideas, particularly regarding properties and investments. She had a sharp eye for detail and an intuitive understanding of people that complemented Sebastian's more analytical approach. Within 2 months he was consulting her regularly, and within 3 she had orchestrated her first independent investment, purchasing a failing textile mill and implementing reforms that made it profitable while also improving conditions for the workers. "You're not what I expected," Sebastian told her one evening as they reviewed financial documents in his study. "What did you expect?" "Someone content to simply be the Duchess, to host parties and wear beautiful gowns and exist as an ornament." He set down his pen, his expression thoughtful. "Instead, I find I've married a woman who is systematically building her own empire within my empire. It's rather magnificent to watch." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Does it bother you? That I want more than just the title?" "Bother me?" "Clara, it's one of the things I admire most about you. You could have accepted rescue and lived comfortably in my shadow. Instead, you're stepping into your own light." He stood, moving around the desk to pull her to her feet. "Though I confess, watching you negotiate with hardened businessmen while maintaining perfect Duchess composure is intensely attractive." "Is it?" Clara smiled up at him. "How attractive?" "Attractive enough that these documents can wait until morning," Sebastian murmured, before claiming her mouth in a kiss that made her forget all about textile mills and investments. Spring brought Margaret's season, and with it a test Clara hadn't anticipated. Margaret was a success, beautiful, charming, and under the Ashford protection, highly sought after. But with success came danger. It was at a garden party that Clara noticed Lord Edmund Carstairs paying particular attention to her sister. Carstairs was handsome, wealthy, and well-connected. He was also, according to Catherine's network of informants, a compulsive gambler who had nearly bankrupted his estate and was desperately seeking a wealthy bride. Clara watched him dance with Margaret, saw the way her sister blushed and smiled, and felt something protective and fierce rise within her. She would not let Margaret be used the way she had been used. That evening she confronted Margaret in her rooms at Ashford House. "He's charming, isn't he, Lord Carstairs?" Margaret's face lit up. "Oh, Clara, he's wonderful, so attentive and kind. He said I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen." "Margaret, I need you to listen to me." Clara sat beside her sister, taking her hands. "Lord Carstairs is in serious financial trouble. He needs to marry money, and he sees you as a solution to his problems." Margaret pulled away, her expression hurt and defensive. "That's not true. He cares for me, Clara. Not everyone is like Lord Whitmore." The words stung, even though Clara knew they came from youth and naivety. "No, not everyone is, but some men are very good at pretending to be what they're not. I've seen his financial records, Margaret. Sebastian showed them to me. Carstairs is desperate. So you and the Duke are going to control whom I marry, decide what's best for me like I'm a child?" Margaret stood, her eyes flashing with anger. "I know you went through something terrible, Clara. I know you were hurt, but you can't protect me from every possible harm by locking me away from anyone who might not be perfect." Clara felt the sting of truth in her sister's words. Was she being overprotective? Or was she exercising the hard-won wisdom of experience? "I'm not trying to lock you away," Clara said carefully. "I'm trying to ensure you make an informed choice. Love him if you want to. Marry him if you choose. But do it with your eyes open, knowing exactly who he is and what he needs from you. Don't walk into marriage blind the way I nearly did." Margaret softened slightly. "I appreciate your concern, truly I do. But I need to make my own decisions, even if they're mistakes. That's the only way I'll learn." After Margaret left, Clara sat alone in the darkened room, wondering if she had become the very thing she once resented, a voice of stern pragmatism crushing romantic dreams. When Sebastian found her there an hour later, she was still wrestling with the question. "Margaret told me about your conversation," he said, sitting beside her. "She's angry with both of us. With good reason, perhaps. Who are we to dictate her choices? We're people who care about her and want to spare her pain." Sebastian pulled Clara against his side. "But you're right to question it. There's a fine line between protection and control. I've walked that line badly more than once." Clara looked up at him. "You have?" "Catherine," he said simply. "When she was 19, she fell in love with a painter. A good man, talented and kind, but utterly unsuitable by society's standards. I forbade the match, used my authority as her guardian to prevent it. She obeyed me, but our relationship was strained for years. She eventually forgave me, but she never forgot, and neither did I. Do you regret it? Every day, because I didn't trust her judgment. I didn't believe she could know her own heart. I treated her like a possession to be managed rather than a person to be respected." He looked at Clara directly. "Don't make my mistake with Margaret. Warn her, advise her, but ultimately trust her to decide her own fate." It was wise counsel, and Clara took it. She apologized to Margaret the next morning, explained her concerns one more time, but made clear that the choice was Margaret's alone. Her sister, mollified and grateful, promised to be cautious. As it turned out, Margaret's own instincts proved sound. After several more encounters with Carstairs, she began to notice the signs Clara had warned about, the way he always steered conversations toward money, his interest in the Ashford properties, his subtle probing about dowries. She ended the courtship herself with grace and firmness, and Clara had never been prouder. But the incident forced Clara to confront something she'd been avoiding, her own unresolved pain from what Lord Whitmore had done. She had been so focused on moving forward, on claiming her new life, that she hadn't truly processed the old wounds. They were still there, festering beneath the surface, influencing her reactions and decisions. One afternoon, she found herself in the Ashford House library, staring at nothing, when Catherine discovered her. "You're thinking about him," Catherine said, not a question but a statement. "How did you know?" "Because you have that look, the one that says you're somewhere else, somewhere darker." Catherine settled into a chair across from Clara. "You've been running from it, you know, from the actual pain of what happened. You married Sebastian, claimed your power, rebuilt your life, but you never actually grieved for what was taken from you. What good would grieving do? It's done. It's over. Is it? Or are you still letting Whitmore's lies define parts of you?" Catherine leaned forward. "Clara, you are not a victim anymore, but you're also not required to simply be strong all the time. Sometimes strength looks like admitting you were hurt, Sometimes it looks like crying. Sometimes it looks like confronting the source of your pain directly. You want me to speak to Whitmore. I want you to do whatever you need to find peace. But yes, if confronting him would help, I think you should do it. Not for revenge, you've already won, but for closure, for the chance to look him in the eye as the Duchess of Ashford and tell him exactly what you think of him. Clara spent 3 days considering it. Finally, she approached Sebastian. I want to confront Whitmore, she said without preamble. Not publicly, not for show. Just a conversation, a reckoning. Sebastian studied her for a long moment. Are you certain? Seeing him again might be more painful than you anticipate. I know, but Catherine is right. I need this. I need to face him from a position of strength and finally close that chapter of my life completely. Then I'll arrange it. Sebastian pulled her close. But not alone. I'll be there, in the room, or just outside. Whatever you prefer. Lord Whitmore arrived at Ashford House 3 days later, summoned by a command he could not refuse. Sebastian had made it clear, accept this meeting or face complete financial ruin. Whitmore, already teetering on the edge of social exile, had no choice but to comply. Clara received him in the drawing room, with Sebastian standing silently by the window. She had dressed carefully for this, a gown of deep blue silk that made her look every inch the Duchess. She wore the Ashford sapphires at her throat. She was armoured in power and position. Whitmore looked diminished. 3 months of social isolation had taken their toll. He was still handsome, but there was a haggardness to him now, a desperate edge. Your Grace, he said stiffly, unable to even meet her eyes. Lord Whitmore. Clara's voice was calm, controlled. Do you know why you're here? I assume to witness your triumph. There was bitterness in his voice. To see how far you've risen while I've fallen. No, Clara said. You're here because I need to say something to you. Something I should have said 3 years ago but didn't, because I was too hurt and too young to find the words. She stepped closer, and finally he looked at her. What she saw in his eyes surprised her. Not defiance or hatred, but shame. What you did to me, Clara continued, her voice steady, was cruel and cowardly. You punished me for having the audacity to demand respect. You destroyed my reputation because I refused to compromise my dignity. And you did it so easily, so carelessly, because you knew society would believe you over me. You knew no one would question a lord's word against a nobody's daughter. Miss Bowmont, Duchess, Sebastian corrected coldly from the window. Duchess, Whitmore amended, swallowing hard. I was angry. You rejected me. No one rejects me. So you decided to ruin me? Clara shook her head. Here's what I want you to understand, Lord Whitmore. For 3 years I lived with the consequences of your lies. I watched my family suffer. I stood in corners at balls and smiled while people whispered about me. I endured isolation and judgment and cruelty, and it nearly broke me. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But it didn't break me. And that's what I need you to know. You tried to destroy me, and you failed. I am stronger now than I was before you tried to crush me. I am happier. I am more powerful. I have built a life that is richer and more meaningful than anything I might have had if you had never entered my world. Whitmore's face was pale. I'm sorry, he whispered. Truly. For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry. It's worth very little, Clara said honestly. Your apology doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't restore the years I lost. But I accept it because holding on to anger only hurts me, not you. She drew herself up to her full height. You are dismissed, Lord Whitmore. I don't expect we'll meet again. And if we do, I will acknowledge you politely and then forget you exist, because you no longer have any power over me. You are nothing but a bad memory that I am choosing to leave behind. Whitmore left without another word, and Clara stood in the center of the drawing room, feeling something shift inside her. Not happiness, exactly, but something close to peace. Sebastian crossed to her immediately, pulling her into his arms. How do you feel? Lighter, Clara said, surprised by the truth of it. I feel lighter. Good. He kissed her forehead. Because you deserve to be free of him in every way that matters. That night, for the first time since the scandal began 3 years ago, Clara slept without nightmares. Summer arrived with all its London glory, stifling heat, crowded ballrooms, and the endless parade of social obligations. Clara had settled into her role as Duchess with increasing confidence, and she and Sebastian had developed a genuine partnership that surprised them both. But what surprised Clara most was the realization, one morning in July, that she was happy. Not just content, not just grateful for her changed circumstances. Actually, deeply, genuinely happy. She was in the garden, reviewing plans for a charitable foundation she was establishing to help women who had been ruined by circumstance, when Sebastian appeared with an expression she'd never seen before: uncertainty. "Clara, I need to tell you something," he said without preamble. "Something I should have told you months ago." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" He sat beside her on the garden bench, his usual confidence visibly shaken. "Do you remember when I told you that I made it my business to know everything about you before I proposed?" "Yes, of course. What I didn't tell you was how long I'd known about you, or why I really chose you as my Duchess." He drew a deep breath. "Clara, I first became aware of you 4 years ago, before the scandal, before Whitmore." Clara stared at him, confused. 4 years ago? But we never met." "No, we didn't. But I saw you." Sebastian's expression turned distant with memory. "It was at a house party in the country. I had been dragged there by Catherine for some reason I can't even remember. You were there with your family, a young woman of 18, laughing with your sister in the gardens. I watched you for perhaps 5 minutes, listening to you tell some story that had your sister in stitches, and I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone so genuinely joyful." Clara's breath caught. "I don't understand." "You haunted me," Sebastian continued quietly. "For months afterward, I found myself thinking about that laughing girl in the garden. But you were too young and I was too busy building my empire. I thought about seeking an introduction, but I told myself it was foolish. Then, a year later, I heard about the scandal, about what Whitmore had done, and I was furious. You were angry about what happened to me, but you didn't even know me. I knew enough. I knew he had destroyed something bright and beautiful for his own petty pride. So I investigated. I learned the truth about what really happened, and I destroyed several of Whitmore's business ventures in retaliation, though he never knew it was me." Clara tried to process this revelation. "For 3 years, you knew about me. You were... what? Watching me. Not watching. Protecting, from a distance, making sure Whitmore couldn't do any more damage, ensuring you had safe places to go, even if you didn't know I was arranging it." He finally met her eyes. "When Catherine suggested I needed to marry, and then mentioned your situation, it felt like fate was giving me a second chance. A chance to finally meet the woman who had occupied my thoughts for years. But I knew if I told you all this, you'd think I was obsessed or unhinged, so I presented it as a practical arrangement." Clara stood, her mind reeling. "You let me think you barely knew who I was. You let me believe this was just a convenient solution to your marriage problem." "Yes." Sebastian stood as well, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. "Because I was a coward. Because I didn't want you to feel any more pressure than you already did. Because I wanted you to come to care for me naturally. Not because you felt obligated to reciprocate feelings I'd harbored for years." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I know this sounds like madness. I know it's not how marriages are supposed to begin. But Clara, you have to understand, from that first moment in the garden, you captured something in me that I didn't even know could be captured." Clara's emotions were a whirlwind. Shock, confusion, anger at the deception, and beneath it all, something else. A dawning understanding of all the small moments over the past months that suddenly made more sense. The way Sebastian had always seemed to know exactly what she needed, the way he had anticipated her thoughts. The way he had watched her with an intensity that went beyond mere partnership. "You should have told me," she said finally. "I know. This entire time, I thought I was entering a marriage of convenience. I thought you saw me as a useful solution to a problem. And instead you married a man who had been half in love with you for years. I understand if you're angry. I understand if this changes things between us." Sebastian's voice was tight. "But I couldn't keep lying to you, Clara. Not when what we have has become so much more than I ever dared hope." Clara turned to face him fully, studying this complicated man she had married. "Are you in love with me, Sebastian?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, completely. Desperately. In ways that terrify me because I've never felt anything close to this before." For 4 years. The beginnings of it for 4 years, the fullness of it these past months, watching you transform from a wounded survivor into a formidable duchess. Watching you claim your power. Watching you smile at me across the dinner table like I'm someone who matters. Watching you sleep in my arms and knowing I would burn down the world before I let anyone hurt you again. He stepped closer. "I am in love with you, Clara Ashford, and I'm terrified that this confession has destroyed whatever we were building." Clara's heart was racing. She thought about the past months, about how her own feelings had evolved from gratitude to partnership to something far deeper. She thought about the nights when she'd found herself studying Sebastian's sleeping face and feeling her chest tighten with emotion she hadn't wanted to name. She thought about how the idea of losing him now made her feel physically ill. "You're an idiot," she said finally. Sebastian blinked. "I beg your pardon." "You're an idiot," Clara repeated, moving closer. "You've been in love with me for years, and instead of telling me, you constructed this elaborate fiction about practical arrangements and convenient solutions. You let me think I was a means to an end rather than—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Rather than someone you actually wanted." "Clara, let me finish." She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her palm. "I have spent the past 2 months falling in love with you, Sebastian Ashford, with your intensity and your strange sense of honor, with the way you protect people who can't protect themselves, with your loyalty and your vulnerability and even your arrogance. I have fallen in love with my husband, and I've been terrified to admit it, because I thought you only wanted me for practical reasons." Sebastian's eyes widened. "You love me." "Apparently we're both idiots," Clara said, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her with a desperate intensity that spoke of years of longing finally unleashed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "I should have told you from the beginning. Probably. But I understand why you didn't. We've both been so busy protecting ourselves that we nearly protected ourselves right past something real." Clara pulled back to look at him properly. "No more secrets, Sebastian. If this is going to work, truly work, we need to be honest with each other, about everything." "No more secrets," he agreed. "Though I should warn you, complete honesty from me will probably be overwhelming. I have 4 years' worth of thoughts about you stored up. I think I can handle it." Clara smiled, feeling something warm and sure settle in her chest. "After all, I'm the Duchess of Ashford now. I can handle anything." The revelation about Sebastian's long-standing feelings should have made everything perfect. In many ways it did. Their partnership deepened into genuine intimacy, their conversations became richer, and the physical aspect of their marriage took on new dimensions now that both admitted their emotions. But life, as Clara was learning, was never simple. The trouble began in September, when news reached London that Lord Whitmore had been found dead in his country estate. The official report called it an accident, a fall down the stairs while intoxicated. But rumors immediately began to circulate that it was suicide, brought on by his complete social and financial collapse. Clara received the news while at breakfast with Sebastian and Catherine. Her first reaction was shock, followed swiftly by something she didn't expect. Guilt. "He's dead, because of us," she said quietly, setting down her tea with trembling hands. Sebastian's expression was carefully neutral. "He's dead because of his own choices. We didn't force him to drink himself into a stupor. We didn't push him down those stairs. But we destroyed his life. We isolated him, ruined him financially, took away everything he had. We held him accountable for his actions, Catherine interjected firmly. Clara, you cannot shoulder responsibility for what Whitmore did to himself. He had choices at every step. He could have apologized genuinely. He could have changed his behavior. He could have accepted the consequences of his actions with dignity. Instead, he spiraled. That's not on you. But the guilt remained, a heavy weight in Clara's chest. She had wanted vindication, had reveled in Whitmore's fall, but she had never wanted him dead. The victory suddenly felt hollow, tainted by tragedy. The Ton, of course, had opinions. Some whispered that the Duke and Duchess of Ashford had blood on their hands. Others argued that justice had been served, albeit harshly. The scandal that had once centered on Clara now expanded to encompass Sebastian's methods of retribution. It was Lord Pemberton who delivered the most damaging blow. At a dinner party 2 weeks after Whitmore's death, he stood and addressed the assembled guests with the self-righteous fervor of a man who had found a cause. We must ask ourselves, Pemberton intoned, whether we want to live in a society where one man, no matter how powerful, can destroy another completely. The Duke of Ashford has become judge, jury, and executioner. Who among us is safe from his wrath if we displease him? Who is safe from the vendetta of his Duchess, no matter how justified her initial grievance? The words were calculated poison, designed to turn the tide of opinion. And to Clara's horror, she saw them take root. Conversations became hushed when she and Sebastian entered rooms. Invitations, while not withdrawn, carried a new tension. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford were powerful, yes, but were they dangerous? Sebastian's response was characteristically direct. He held a private meeting with the most influential members of Parliament and the peerage, laying out in precise detail every man he had destroyed and why. Each case involved abuse of power, predatory behavior, or corruption. He presented documentation, witness statements, evidence that painted a picture not of random vendetta, but of systematic justice. If you take issue with my methods, Sebastian told them coolly, then I suggest you do better at policing your own ranks. I take action because society fails to. The day you begin holding men accountable for their crimes against the vulnerable, I will gladly step back. Until then, I will continue to be what I have always been, a threat to those who deserve threatening. The meeting ended with grudging respect from some, continued suspicion from others. But Sebastian had made his position clear. He would not apologize for protecting the powerless, even if his methods made the powerful uncomfortable. For Clara, however, the situation was more complicated. She found herself questioning not just Whitmore's death, but her own transformation. Had she become so focused on power that she had lost sight of mercy? Had her desire for vindication made her cruel? She was wrestling with these questions in the Ashford House library when Margaret found her. "You're torturing yourself," Margaret said without preamble, settling beside her sister. "I can see it. A man is dead, Margaret, partially because of actions Sebastian and I took. A man is dead because he was a coward and a villain who couldn't face the consequences of his own behavior." Margaret's voice was surprisingly firm. "Clara, I was there. I saw what Whitmore's lies did to you, to our family. I watched Mama cry herself to sleep for months. I watched Papa age 10 years in one. I saw you stand in corners at balls with your head held high, while people who should have known better whispered cruel lies. Don't romanticize Whitmore now that he's dead. He was not a victim. He was a perpetrator who finally faced justice. But does justice include destruction? Does it include making someone's life so unbearable that death seems preferable?" Margaret considered this carefully. "I don't know, but I know this. You and Sebastian didn't invent the rules of this society. You're just playing by them more effectively than others do. If that makes the powerful uncomfortable, perhaps that's exactly what needs to happen." Her sister's words echoed in Clara's mind for days, and gradually she came to a difficult truth. She could acknowledge the tragedy of Whitmore's death without taking full responsibility for it. She could feel regret without feeling guilt. She could be both compassionate and strong, both merciful and unwilling to tolerate injustice. But the public controversy had taken its toll. Sebastian became quieter, more withdrawn. He spent long hours in his study, poring over business documents with an intensity that suggested he was trying to outrun his thoughts. Clara recognized the behavior because she had done the same thing years ago, throwing herself into activity to avoid confronting pain. One evening, she entered his study without knocking and simply stood there until he looked up. "You're drowning," she said quietly, "and I'm not going to let you." Sebastian leaned back, exhaustion written in every line of his face. "I'm fine, Clara." "You're not. You're carrying the weight of Whitmore's death like it's your personal failure. You're second-guessing every decision you've made, and you're shutting me out in the process." "I'm not." "You are." Clara moved around the desk to stand beside him. "Sebastian, we promised each other honesty. So here's my honesty. I don't know if what we did was entirely right. I suspect there are shades of grey in this situation that neither of us wants to examine too closely. But I do know that you acted from a place of protecting others. And I know that Whitmore made his own choices right up until the end. You can carry regret without carrying blame." Sebastian pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her neck. "I never wanted him dead, Clara. I wanted him diminished. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to be powerless. But I never wanted this." "I know. Neither did I." They sat in silence for long minutes, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Finally, Sebastian spoke again. "Perhaps we went too far. Perhaps my methods are too harsh. But I don't know how else to create change in a system that protects men like Whitmore. If I soften, if I show mercy too soon, then other predators learn they can act with impunity as long as they're patient enough to wait out the consequences." "Then maybe the answer isn't to soften," Clara said slowly, an idea forming. "Maybe the answer is to build something better, something that doesn't rely solely on your personal intervention." She explained her vision then, a network of support for women in situations like hers had been, legal assistance, financial aid, social protection, a systematic approach to addressing the inequities that allowed men like Whitmore to thrive. "We can't change society overnight," Clara continued, "but we can create structures that make it harder for the vulnerable to be exploited. We can use our power not just to punish wrongdoers, but to prevent wrongs from occurring in the first place." Sebastian looked at her with something like awe. "You're proposing we revolutionize social welfare. I'm proposing we do what we've always done, refuse to accept injustice simply because it's traditional." Clara smiled. "What do you say, Your Grace? Shall we build an empire of protection rather than just destruction?" "With you?" Sebastian cupped her face in his hands. "I'd build anything." They spent the next weeks laying groundwork for what would become the Ashford Foundation, a charitable organization with unprecedented scope and resources. Clara threw herself into the project with passion, and gradually she saw Sebastian's darkness lift. Purpose, they both discovered, was the best antidote to guilt. Winter arrived with its usual London fervour, bringing with it the little season and renewed social obligations, but Clara found that the events she had once dreaded now held little power over her. She was no longer the scandal of London. She was the Duchess of Ashford, co-founder of a charitable foundation that was already making waves throughout society. The foundation's first public event was a gala to raise funds and awareness. Clara had planned every detail meticulously, from the guest list to the speakers. Among those speaking would be 3 women who had been helped by the foundation, women whose stories of survival and resilience would, Clara hoped, open eyes and hearts. The evening of the gala, Clara stood before her mirror while her maid arranged her hair. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, the Ashford diamonds at her throat. But what struck her most was her own reflection, the confidence in her posture, the strength in her eyes. She had come so far from the broken girl who had once stood in corners hoping to be invisible. Sebastian appeared behind her, devastatingly handsome in his evening clothes. "You're nervous," he observed. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "What if no one comes? What if they dismiss this as a duchess's vanity project?" "Then they're fools, and we'll proceed without them." Sebastian turned her to face him. "But they'll come, Clara, and they'll listen, because you've earned their respect, even if some of them won't admit it." The ballroom at Ashford House was transformed into an elegant venue for change. As guests arrived, Clara greeted them with Sebastian at her side, feeling his steady presence anchor her. The attendance was impressive. Lords and ladies, politicians, business leaders, even some members of the royal family. Catherine worked the room with practiced efficiency, steering influential people toward conversations with the Foundation's representatives. Lord Crane, who had become one of their staunchest supporters, was charming donations from wealthy widows with shameless enthusiasm. But the moment that mattered came when Clara stood to speak. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Many of you knew me first as a scandal. Some of you believed lies about my character. Some of you cut me directly in the street." She paused, letting the uncomfortable truth settle. "I don't say this to shame you, but to remind us all of how quickly society can turn on those who are vulnerable. How easily reputations can be destroyed and lives ruined by rumor and prejudice. I was fortunate. I had family who loved me, an aunt who gave me shelter, and eventually a man who saw past society's judgment to offer me protection and partnership." She looked at Sebastian, who watched her with undisguised pride. "But most women in my situation have none of those advantages. When they're ruined, whether by their own mistakes or others' malice, they have nowhere to turn. They become invisible, discarded, condemned to poverty or worse. The Ashford Foundation exists to change that, to provide legal protection, financial assistance, and social support to women who have been failed by the system that should protect them. We cannot undo the past, but we can shape the future, and we can do it together." The applause that followed was thunderous. But more importantly, when the three women who had been helped by the Foundation told their stories, Clara saw tears in the eyes of some of London's most hardened socialites. She saw understanding dawn in faces that had previously shown only judgment. By the end of the evening, the Foundation had raised more than twice its initial goal. Dozens of women had volunteered their time and resources, and Clara had received more than one quiet apology from people who had once condemned her. But the most meaningful moment came from an unexpected source. As the guests were departing, Lady Amelia Thornton, the girl Clara had saved from Lord Ashworth months ago, approached with an older couple. "Your Grace," Amelia said, her voice trembling slightly, "these are my parents. They wanted to meet you." Lord and Lady Thornton looked uncomfortable but determined. Lord Thornton spoke first. "Duchess, we wanted to thank you. Amelia told us what you did for her, what you and the Duke did. She might have been ruined if not for your intervention. Any decent person would have done the same," Clara said gently. "But most didn't, most wouldn't." Lady Thornton's eyes were bright with tears. "I need you to know something. 3 years ago, I heard the rumors about you and Lord Whitmore, and I believed them. I told my friends you had been too forward, too bold. I contributed to your destruction through thoughtless gossip." She drew a shaky breath. "I am deeply ashamed of that now, and I am profoundly grateful that you chose to be merciful to my daughter, despite having every reason to be bitter toward women like me." Clara felt her own eyes sting. "Lady Thornton, I appreciate your honesty, and I'm grateful that Amelia came to me when she needed help. That's what the Foundation is for, to ensure that no woman has to face such situations alone." After they departed, Sebastian pulled Clara into his arms. "You're crying." "Happy tears," Clara assured him. I never thought I'd hear an actual apology, a real acknowledgement of wrongdoing. You're changing the world, Clara Ashford, one heart at a time." The success of the gala was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, the Foundation's work expanded rapidly. Clara found herself busier than ever, conducting interviews, reviewing cases, making decisions that affected real lives. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. But amidst all the activity, Clara also discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one December morning when she found herself inexplicably nauseated by the smell of breakfast. The physician confirmed what she had suspected, and Clara sat in her chambers, hands pressed to her still flat stomach, trying to comprehend the magnitude of this new development. She was going to be a mother. She was going to bring a child into this complicated, beautiful, sometimes cruel world. And unlike her own mother, who had raised Clara in relative innocence before scandal struck, Clara would raise her child with full knowledge of society's capacity for both kindness and cruelty. When she told Sebastian that evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms with uncharacteristic lack of composure, his face buried in her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "A child," he said wonderingly. "Clara, we're going to have a child. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. Terrified, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But happy? "Clara, I didn't know it was possible to be this happy." They decided to wait until after the new year to make the announcement public, wanting to savor the knowledge privately for a few weeks. But Catherine, with her uncanny ability to read her brother, figured it out within days. "You're pregnant," she announced without preamble one afternoon. Clara, who had been reviewing foundation documents, looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" "Sebastian keeps looking at you like you're made of porcelain. He's suddenly insisting you don't attend evening events if they run too late, and you've stopped drinking wine at dinner." Catherine's smile was warm. "Congratulations, Clara. You're going to be a wonderful mother." "I hope so. I find myself both excited and absolutely terrified. That's called being a parent. Welcome to the club." Catherine settled into a chair. "Speaking of which, we need to discuss preparations. The nursery will need to be updated. We'll need to hire a nurse, though not until closer to the birth, and you'll need to reduce your commitments in the later months." "Reduce my commitments?" "Catherine, the foundation is just getting started. I can't simply step back. You can and you will, at least temporarily. Clara, I know you're determined to change the world, but you also need to take care of yourself and this baby. We can manage things while you focus on becoming a mother. The foundation isn't going anywhere." It was practical advice, but Clara found herself resisting it. She had finally found her purpose, her way of making a difference. The idea of stepping back, even temporarily, felt like losing ground. But as the weeks passed and her pregnancy became more apparent, Clara was forced to admit that Catherine was right. She was exhausted in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the constant activity was becoming physically difficult. With Sebastian's gentle insistence and Catherine's firm management, Clara gradually reduced her direct involvement in the foundation, transitioning to more of an advisory role. It was harder than she expected, letting go of even partial control. But it also gave her time to prepare for motherhood, to strengthen her relationship with Sebastian, and to reflect on how dramatically her life had transformed in less than a year. Spring arrived with unprecedented warmth, and with it came the birth of Clara and Sebastian's daughter. She was born on a morning in late March after a labor that terrified Sebastian and exhausted Clara. But when the midwife placed the tiny, perfect infant in Clara's arms, she felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of love. "She's beautiful," Sebastian breathed, his finger tracing their daughter's impossibly small hand. "Clara, she's perfect." They named her Eleanor after Sebastian's mother, with Margaret as her middle name. Little Eleanor Ashford, future heiress to one of England's greatest fortunes, was utterly oblivious to her own importance. She simply slept and ate and made tiny sounds that reduced her powerful father to helpless adoration. The christening was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, the same church where Clara and Sebastian had married. As Clara held Eleanor during the ceremony, she looked out at the assembled guests, many of the same people who had witnessed her transformation from scandal to duchess, and felt the weight of everything that had changed. Margaret was there, engaged now to a kind young man with modest prospects but genuine affection. Clara's parents sat in the front row, her father's eyes bright with pride, her mother dabbing at tears of joy. Catherine stood as godmother, looking fierce and tender in equal measure. Lord Crane was godfather, having accepted the role with surprising seriousness. And throughout the ceremony, Clara felt Sebastian's presence beside her, solid, constant, unshakable. The man who had knelt before her at that winter ball and offered her not just salvation but partnership. The man who had loved her long before she knew how to love herself. The man who had become not just her husband, but her truest ally. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at Ashford House. As guests mingled and toasted the new addition to the Ashford family, Clara found herself on the terrace, needing a moment of quiet. She was surprised when Lord Pemberton joined her. The man who had so publicly questioned Sebastian's methods months ago now looked uncomfortable but determined. "Your Grace, might I have a word?" Clara nodded, curious. "I owe you an apology," Pemberton said without preamble. "Several, actually. I was one of those who believed the worst of you 3 years ago. I contributed to the gossip, and then, when you married the Duke, I was among those who questioned his judgment and methods." He paused. "But I've watched what you've done with the foundation. I've seen the lives you've changed. My own niece came to you last month when she found herself in a desperate situation, and you helped her with discretion and genuine care. You could have refused, given my past behavior, but you didn't. The foundation helps women regardless of their family's politics," Clara said quietly. "That's rather the point. I understand that now. And I understand something else. You and the Duke were right to demand accountability from men like Whitmore. Society has been too comfortable turning a blind eye to predatory behavior because it's inconvenient to address. You refuse to be convenient." He met her eyes directly. "I'm sorry, Duchess, for everything, and I hope you'll allow me to support the Foundation's work going forward. Not for social gain, but because it's the right thing to do." It was the most genuine apology Clara had received, and she accepted it with grace. "Thank you, Lord Pemberton. Your support would be very welcome." After he departed, Sebastian found her on the terrace. Without Eleanor to care for, the baby was safely with her nurse, he pulled Clara into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything. How far we've come. How much has changed." Clara looked up at him. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before our wedding? That you wanted someone who was real even when reality was uncomfortable?" "I remember. I think I finally understand what you meant. Being real means acknowledging complexity. It means accepting that we can do good work and still make mistakes, that we can love fiercely and still have doubts, that we can be strong and vulnerable, merciful and just all at once." She touched his face gently. "You gave me more than power, Sebastian. You gave me permission to be fully human, flawed and trying and sometimes failing, but always genuine." "You did the same for me," Sebastian said quietly. "Before you, I was so focused on control that I forgot how to be vulnerable. You taught me that strength and softness aren't opposites, that I could be powerful and still allow myself to love completely." He kissed her forehead. "I knelt before you in that ballroom to make a point to society. But the truth is, I would kneel before you every day for the rest of my life simply because you make me want to be worthy of you." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "We're both worthy, Sebastian. We're both enough. And together, we're building something that matters." Inside, they could hear the sounds of celebration, laughter and music, and the clink of crystal. Their daughter was surrounded by people who loved her, protected by the foundation her parents were building, heir to a legacy that valued justice as much as wealth. "Do you ever regret it?" Sebastian asked suddenly. "The way we started? The calculation of it?" Clara considered the question seriously. "No, because even if it began as an arrangement, it became something real. We chose each other, Sebastian. Not just that first night, but every day since. We keep choosing each other, and I think that's more romantic than any passionate impulse could be." "Then I have a request," Sebastian said, a smile playing at his lips. "It's been nearly a year and a half since I last proposed to you, and that proposal, while effective, was rather lacking in genuine sentiment." "What are you saying?" To Clara's shock and delight, Sebastian lowered himself to one knee right there on the terrace, taking her hand in his. "Clara Ashford, love of my life, mother of my child, partner in all things that matter, would you do me the extraordinary honor of remaining married to me, not because of arrangements or social necessity, but because we choose this, because we choose each other every day for the rest of our lives?" Clara laughed through her tears. "Yes, you impossible man. Yes, I choose you. I choose us." He rose and kissed her, with the kind of passion that still made her breathless, even after all this time. When they finally broke apart, Clara saw Catherine watching from the doorway, her expression satisfied. I knew it would work, Catherine called out. I knew you two were perfect for each other. You're insufferable, Sebastian called back, but his tone was warm. And yet you love me anyway. Catherine grinned. Come inside, you two. There's cake, and Eleanor is demanding her parents' attention with increasingly insistent cries. Welcome to parenthood. As they moved back toward the celebration, Clara paused at the threshold, looking back at the terrace where Sebastian had just re-proposed. This house, this life, this family, all of it had seemed impossible 18 months ago when she'd stood in a corner at a ball, resigned to a life of whispers and judgment. But then a duke had knelt before her, offering not pity, but power. And together, they had built something neither could have created alone. Epilogue, 3 years later. The gardens of Ashford Hall, Sebastian's country estate, were in full summer glory. Clara sat beneath an ancient oak tree, watching as 3-year-old Eleanor chased butterflies with more enthusiasm than success. Their second child, a boy named Thomas, slept peacefully in his cradle beside her. The Ashford Foundation had expanded beyond London, establishing branches in 3 major cities. Margaret was now happily married with her first child on the way. Clara's parents had retired to a comfortable cottage on Ashford land, where her father could pursue his studies without the burden of parish duties. Lord Whitmore's death, while still a complicated memory, no longer haunted Clara's dreams. She had made peace with the role she'd played in his downfall, accepting both the justice of holding him accountable and the tragedy of how it had ended. Life, she had learned, was rarely simple or wholly satisfying in its resolutions. Sebastian emerged from the house, carrying a bundle of papers and looking harassed. Your foundation has received 17 new applications this week alone. Catherine is demanding more funding. Lord Crane has somehow convinced 3 additional lords to join our board of directors, which means more meetings. And Eleanor has informed me that she requires a pony immediately, or she shall simply perish from disappointment. Clara laughed. What did you tell her? That we would discuss it with her mother, of course. I'm not brave enough to make unilateral decisions about ponies. He settled beside her on the blanket, automatically reaching to check that Thomas was still sleeping soundly. Though I should note that I was promised a quiet country weekend, and you've somehow turned it into another organizational summit. Would you have it any other way? Not for a moment. Sebastian pulled her close. Though I do think we've earned a few hours of purely selfish enjoyment. The foundation will survive without us for an afternoon. Catherine is perfectly capable of managing the applications, and Eleanor's pony can wait until tomorrow. What did you have in mind? Watching our children play, enjoying the sunshine, remembering why we built all of this in the first place. He kissed her temple. Sometimes the revolution can wait, Clara. Sometimes it's enough to simply be happy. Clara leaned into her husband's embrace, watching Eleanor's joyful pursuit of butterflies, listening to Thomas's peaceful breathing, feeling the warmth of summer sun on her face. This was what they had fought for, not just power or vindication or social change, but this moment of simple, profound contentment. I love you, she said quietly. I don't say it enough amidst all the planning and work. But I love you, Sebastian Ashford. Completely. I know. His arms tightened around her. And I love you, more than I did yesterday. Less than I will tomorrow. Eleanor, having finally caught a butterfly only to immediately release it, came running over. Mama, Papa, did you see? I caught one. We saw, darling, Clara said, pulling her daughter onto her lap. You were very brave. I'm always brave, just like you, Mama. Eleanor's small face was serious. You were very brave before I was born, weren't you? Auntie Catherine told me stories. Clara and Sebastian exchanged glances. They had agreed to eventually tell Eleanor the truth about their unconventional beginning, but they hadn't expected Catherine to jump the gun quite so soon. What kind of stories? Clara asked cautiously. That people were mean to you, but you didn't let them make you small. And that Papa saw you and knew you were special, and he married you even though some people said he shouldn't. And then you both helped lots of other people who had mean things happen to them. Eleanor looked up at her mother with absolute trust. That's what makes you heroes. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. We're not heroes, sweetheart. We're just people who try to do the right thing when we can. That's what heroes are, Mama. Eleanor said it with the simple certainty of a child who had never doubted her parents' essential goodness. Later, after Eleanor had been convinced to nap and Thomas had been fed and settled, Clara and Sebastian found themselves alone in the master bedroom. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in warm, golden light. She called us heroes, Clara said wonderingly. Our daughter thinks we're heroes. Then we'd better make sure we live up to that assessment, Sebastian replied. Though I suspect as she gets older, she'll discover we're far more complicated than any fairy tale hero. Good. I want her to understand complexity. I want her to know that being good doesn't mean being perfect, and that struggling doesn't mean failing. Clara turned to face her husband fully. I want her to know that love can begin in unexpected ways, and that choosing each other daily is more powerful than any single grand gesture. She'll know. We'll teach her. Sebastian drew Clara down onto the bed beside him. But for now, let's just be us. Not the Duke and Duchess, not the founders of a charitable empire, not parents or social reformers or symbols of anything. Just Sebastian and Clara, two people who found each other against impossible odds and built an extraordinary life together. Clara kissed him, long and deep and full of promise. I can do that. I think I can definitely do that. Outside, the summer afternoon stretched toward evening. In London, the Ashford Foundation continued its work, changing lives one case at a time. In drawing rooms and ballrooms across England, people continued to tell the story of the scandal who became a duchess and the duke who had knelt before her. But in that sun-washed bedroom in Ashford Hall, none of that mattered. There was only this. Two people who had chosen love over convenience, justice over comfort, and each other over everything else. Clara Bowmont Ashford had been a scandal, then a duchess, then a mother and reformer. But more than any of those things, she had become herself, fully, genuinely, unapologetically herself. And that, perhaps, was the greatest transformation of all. As she drifted towards sleep in Sebastian's arms, Clara thought about that winter ball 2 years ago, about standing in a corner, resigned to her fate, about the impossible man who had crossed a crowded ballroom to offer her his hand, about the single word, yes, that had changed everything. She had said yes to rescue, yes to power, yes to partnership, but most importantly, she had said yes to possibility, yes to transformation, yes to love. And in the end, that yes had made all the difference. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, Echoes of Romance.